Welcome to the Amateur Church Podcast, where we pursue excellence in ministry with the right motivation, for the sake of love. I'm Pastor Matt, and I'm so thankful that you're on this disciples journey with me. As we are in Genesis 26 through 38 this week, we are looking at the lives of Isaac and Jacob and the beginning of the life of Joseph, these patriarchs. And we've asked some devotional questions, mainly about the life of Jacob, and his deception, but then God changing his life and how that can apply to us. But today is more of an apologetic approach, where we want to ask, if a skeptic were reading passages like this, what might come up in their minds? How can we answer their questions? But also, are there elements in these chapters that we see that we could engage a skeptic with? And that's part of the apologetic process. It's not always defending our own faith, but it is taking our faith and bringing out the faith of others and trying to show how theirs, if they are anti-Christ, that theirs will actually crumble. And that's what we find really in one of the chapters in Genesis. In fact, in Genesis chapter 31, I want to bring out a very important scene in which some things are transpiring between Jacob and Laban, his uncle, but also a verse that is pretty daunting for skeptics and pretty daunting for other faiths when Jacob and Laban have their interaction. So let's get the context. Go with me to Genesis chapter 31, and we're going to look at an apologetic approach that we can use within these verses. So in Genesis chapter 31, you've had the context of Jacob marrying Leah and then Rachel and staying with Laban and working for him for a while, and then all of a sudden they, because of the prosperity of Jacob, Laban likes Jacob being there because his flocks are also being prosperous. But God calls Jacob to leave, and it is time for Jacob and his families to leave. And Jacob doesn't want to start a war or start some of the infighting that had been going on, and so he tries to leave without Laban knowing, and that's kind of what's going on in chapter 31. In fact, when Jacob is told to leave, he gathers his families together. But Rachel, in verse 19, it says, when Laban had gone to shear his flock, then Rachel stole the household idols that were at her father's. Now, I want you to pay attention to that, because imagine these statues, or whatever it may have been in that day, but imagine these statues as household idols. And you say, well, what's the big deal with that? Well, notice what Laban calls them. It then says in verse 20, and Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing, and so he fled with all that he had. Now, jump down with me. And as you see, Laban pursues Jacob. He follows after Jacob, and he comes to Jacob and said, "Hey, why did you leave without and carry my daughters away and without me telling you goodbye?" And then he says, "Now you have indeed gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house." In verse 30, it says, "But why did you steal my gods?" Now, again, Jacob was unaware of this, and yet Laban realizes that something had been done. His household idols had been taken, and he calls them his gods. Now, when I'm reading this passage, I'm reminded of an experience I had in Washington, D.C. back about 2005. I had gone on a mission trip with a group from Liberty Baptist Church, and we were serving in Baltimore. And while we were there, we went into Washington, D.C. for a day doing some sightseeing, and we go around and see all the great things, and we're trying to get back as quick as we can. So we say, instead of walking back to the train station, we're going to jump in a cab. And so we hail a cab. There's about 5 of us all together, so we're all cramming into this one little cab. And as we're going, I just kind of make small talk with this guy and just ask him about his religious beliefs. And so again, there's 4 or 5 of us in this cab with this guy. and we just bring up the Bible and really just bring up religion as a whole. And I simply ask, hey, what's your belief about God? Do you worship God? Do you believe in God? And he said, oh yes, I worship God. And he points to this statue sitting on his dashboard, and he said, "This is my God." And I chuckled a little bit, not overly, emphatic in my laughing, but I chuckled a little bit because it just seemed strange to me. I had never, at that time, had never experienced something like this, or with someone who worshipped a statue. And so I just engaged him a little bit. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I don't know. It just, as an 18-year-old, I just simply asked, "Hey, hold on just a second. You're telling me that the God that you worship, the God that you give your devotion to, the God that you trust in, is sitting on your dashboard?" I said, "What would happen if I grabbed that idol?" That statue is what I called it. What would happen if I grabbed that statue and threw it out the window? And he said, "Oh, no, you cannot do that. You can't hurt my God." And it became this overwhelming sense for me of pity for this guy, that as I was hearing him talk about his devotion and his love for a statue, and that he worshipped this thing, and that this statue actually protected him, and yet I had the power as an 18-year-old kid to grab the statue with my own two hands, throw it out the window, and break it into pieces, and that would be devastating for him. And that's the scene that I get when I'm coming to Genesis chapter 31, and I hear Laban say, "Hey, you have stolen my gods. You have taken the idols that I trust in, that I pray to, that I worship." And I think about how futile and how honestly ridiculous it is for us to put our trust in statues or idols. And I think about religions, especially Hinduism, that puts their trust in these idols or statues, and many other religions that worship things that can be carved by mankind. And in reading this passage, it kind of brought up for me, hey, how do we engage with someone that has idol worship, and specifically these statues? Well, we want to be reminded of a few things, and I want you to pay attention. I want you to listen, and then I want to kind of bring it home to us as believers. But I believe that we are called to do three things when it comes to idols, specifically statues and those graven images that God has told us not to make concerning him. And the first thing that we need to do in a conversation is point out the frailty of idols, that every idol is really a satanic monument, and that Satan is limited in his power. Listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. It says in verse 19, "What do I mean then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become sharers in demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We are not stronger than he, are we?" And so what we first need to understand is that every idol, whether it be a statue or a graven image or something that someone is praying to and worshiping, that there is demonic influence and power behind that. God is not pleased with idol worship. In fact, Exodus chapter 20, "Thou shalt not have other gods before me, and then thou shalt not make any graven image." And so point out the demonic and the frailty, the demonic presence and the frailty of idols, of statues. And again, you need to be careful in how you do that. My conversation with this taxi driver, of course, I was 18, had never experienced this before, didn't really know exactly what to say, but it was just an overwhelming thought in my mind that, hey, this guy really, his life is hopeless if it is dependent upon this statue that can easily be broken by man. And there are ways that we can do that, especially in other countries. Now, since then, I've gone to other countries and I've learned a few ways to engage people, and really, instead of tearing down their idol, it's not so much the structure that I want to tear down and make fun of that, because Paul wasn't even concerned with the structure or physical presence of the idol. It was the meaning behind it and where people put their hope. Also consider in Acts chapter 17, as Paul is walking through Athens, and he says, look, I observe in verse 22 that you were very religious in all respects. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I found an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. So Paul was not so much focused on the idols as he was, what was the worship of the idols? What was the attitude of the heart? So when you engage someone, point out the frailty or the lack of hope that can come in the in the worship of these false gods, and you need to do some work in that. You need to pray about how to engage someone in that type of in that type of living and activity. But you also need to point out the power of the one true God. And in fact, this is what Paul does in Acts chapter 17. He says, the God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, that they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist. And he then says in verse 29, being then the children of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and thought in man. So the presence and power of God is not limited to an idol or a statue, some graven image. This is why we are told not to make graven images, because God is greater than those images. And so this is a reminder for us that we should be able to give a response to people about the power of God. Isaiah chapter 44 says in verse 6, thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first and the last, and there is no God besides me. Who is like me? Let him proclaim and declare it. Yes, let him recount it to me in order, from the time that I established the ancient nation, and let them declare to them the things that are coming and the events that are going to take place. Do not tremble and do not be afraid. Have I not long since announced it to you and declared it? And you are my witnesses. Is there any God besides me? Or is there any other rock? I know of none. And then the prophet Isaiah goes into, by the power of the Spirit of God, into this description. Verse 9 of chapter 44 in Isaiah says, those who fashion a graven image are all of them futile, and their precious things are of no profit. Even their own witnesses fail to see or know, so they will be put to shame. Who has fashioned a god or cast an idol to no profit? Behold, all his companions will be put to shame, for the craftsmen themselves are mere men. Let them all assemble themselves, let them stand up, let them tremble, let them together be put to shame. And so you can bring up how in comparison, the gods of Hindu and other religions are no match for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Christianity. That the God that we serve is greater. And so even talking about your own experiences or walking through the authority of the Word of God shows us the power of a God that is not limited to a statue sitting on a dashboard, or limited to gods, household idols that can be stolen out of one's house in Laban's life. And so Genesis 31 brings up this apologetic scenario in which we can ask, hey, can your gods be stolen? Or your gods created by man's hands, and can they be destroyed? And if so, they are not truly gods. And this is true of every other religion that promotes idol worship. So we point out the frailty of idols and the demonic presence behind those. We point out the power of God. And in order to not only discuss with them the work of idols in their lives, but also to be a good example before them, I would encourage you, Christian, that we need to beware of our own Christian idols. Now, that may seem like an oxymoron, that if we're Christian, then of course we have no idols because our God is Jesus Christ, and so we worship him and him alone. And yet, I want you to take some time in this apologetic episode and do some heart inventory. Take an examination. Where are the idols in your life? Because we're shown even in Scripture that good things can become idols. What I mean by that is an Old Testament example would be in the book of Numbers. You have where the Israelites are going through the wilderness, and God sends, because of their grumbling, complaining, and rebellion, God sends serpents to bite and to kill many of the Israelites. Well, Aaron and Moses lift up this bronze serpent that's made, and all they have to do is look upon that bronze serpent, and they're healed, pointing to Jesus Christ, who would use this as a foreshadowing of him taking on the sin of the world and people looking to him. John chapter 3, Jesus references that story and says, just as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so the Son of Man shall be lifted up. And we know that our salvation comes from Christ on the cross. Beautiful picture of the gospel. It's gospel-centered. And yet what we find in the Old Testament is that the bronze serpent, the actual physical bronze serpent, had become an idol for the people of God. In fact, Hezekiah, the king, in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 4, it says that Hezekiah tore down all the wicked high places, demolished all the holy pillars and the sacred pole, and he shattered the bronze serpent that Moses had crafted. Now, this is very important because if you were alive during that time and maybe you knew the story, and knew of how the Israelites were saved by looking at the bronze serpent, and Hezekiah comes in and he sees the worship of this idol, you might say, whoa, that represents a past victory of God in our lives. We can't destroy that. But the worship of that statue, the worship of that serpent, was idolatry. And they had set up a memorial where they put more worship and more focus on a thing than the God who actually saved them. Because it was not the bronze serpent that saved them, it was the power of God and their faith in the power of God through that. Now, fast forward to where we are today. Are there particular idols, even in the Christian church, that we have set up where we worship more the thing than we do the God that is over these particular elements that we might even use in Christian worship? For instance, right now, I know many Christians that they will wear a cross or wear something that has a cross on it, and they, whether they realize it or not, put more emphasis upon a particular thing than they do God. And it is very apparent many times where they get more upset over the loss of that thing, a physical emblem or engraven image, than they do their relationship with God. And so if you're worshiping a cross, then you're not worshiping Jesus Christ. We worship the God who was crucified, not a piece of wood. And that's just one example. I know many churches that they worship particular things in a sanctuary. And I know this may be hard for some of us to hear, but we need to ask, are there particular things that we would be upset with if they were removed from our worship services, that we would be more upset with than we are upset that the presence of God is not with us? And I know in particular, I've had some who have even come to me and said, Matt, if anything changes regarding this particular element or this particular physical structure, like if that changes, then I'm leaving the church or I'm gone. And their worship was more for a piece of wood or a piece of metal or a particular picture or even a person and their name on something than it is the presence of God. And I want you to even take an inventory in your own heart. What do we actually worship? Are we worshiping Jesus Christ, or are we worshiping man-made elements that simply remind us of Christianity, and have they become idols in our hearts, like the bronze serpent? And you say, well, Matt, I really don't have a problem. We can remove things, and that doesn't matter to me. But let me now plow a little closer to the corn, and that is, what are things in our life that we have made as idols? It may not be graven images. It may simply be our reputation. It may be your bank account. It may be a particular physical thing, your car, your house, or maybe relationships that you have. I'm not sure what that might be, but as we think about those things, I want you to consider today, even the thing that might be in your hand right now. Our phone right now can be one of the biggest idols. Think if you were to have that removed from you, or lost, or stolen, would we respond more like Laban? Hey, why have you taken the idol of my house? And he was freaking out over this. Or do we consider that the presence of God is more important to us than even our phone? Because our phone connects us. It connects us to friends, connects us to family, connects us to the world around us. But really, does it distract us from God and His presence? And so maybe that's an idol for you. That's one that I thought of and kind of wrote down in my journal today. And so my prayer is that you would take an examination, that as we go out and proclaim Jesus Christ to the world, that we would realize that we need to be an example for the world. And if we're going to speak against the graven images and the idols apologetically in defense of the faith, then we need to live out that destruction of idols in our own lives, whatever it may be. And so may Christ be exalted, and may all other things be destroyed in our life. It's at this point now that I would love to share with you the ministry of the week, that kind of highlight a ministry of the week, and our ministry moment this week. And the ministry that I want to highlight for you is very important to my heart, as we have developed a relationship over the past couple of years, really. But the ministry is it's the Port Church down in Mobile, Alabama. Dr. Reed Guy has become a great friend of mine, an encouragement to me. In fact, we talked just this week. I mean, we'll text every now and then, and just this week. And I love Reed and his wife Lori and his two precious kids. And he planted this church a little over a year ago, and we've had the opportunity to go down and encourage him. And he has had the opportunity, and he and his church have had the opportunity to come and lead worship for us on a Sunday morning, to be a part of a missions conference back in November. And we'll actually see him soon, and we're financially supporting them as a church, and they are supporting us in planning some different mission opportunities to help us and encourage us. So I wanted to highlight their ministry. One day I'm going to have him on the show, in an episode, and kind of share what's going on. But I want, as a ministry highlight, for you to pray for the Port Church, and especially the 128 project that they've got going on, feeding the hungry down in that area in Mobile, and stretching even into Mississippi in certain places. Again, you'll get to hear from him pretty soon. But Dr. Reed Guy, his wife Lori, and their great church down there. I know just recently they've called a pastor of discipleship to help them, and we got an update on the church, and just love them so much. And I wanted to highlight them today. So pray for the Port Church in Mobile, Alabama, and consider how you might get involved. If you'd like to get involved, reach out to me, and I can get you their contact. I know they would definitely appreciate your participation and partnership in their work. Hey, I love you, and I'm praying for you. And remember that apologetics, the point of apologetics is not to win an argument, but it's to win the heart. God bless.